There are tons of urban legends surrounding Chernobyl, from a mutated spider that killed 3 people in an apartment building in the Ukraine to the shadowy apparitions in abandoned buildings. These are unbelievable Chernobyl urban legends that might actually be true. We've all heard the stories about mutated animals in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Turns out many of the animals do have odd mutations, but there's one urban legend about a mutated spider that takes things to a much more horrific level. After all, who would ever want to run into a mutated spider? Unless you thought you'd have a chance to turn out like Peter Parker, but that's not the case with this story. So, a story about a killer mutant spider from Chernobyl was reported in a Turkish newspaper in 1990. 2 residents of an apartment in the Ukraine had been found in the elevator having suffered extreme loss of BLOOD, but none of it was found at the scene. It looked like it had been sucked out of them, as there were also 2 puncture wounds on their necks. People started to whisper tales about vampires stalking the building, and some residents got so scared that they avoided using the elevators completely. Then 2 detectives investigated. On the 3rd day of their investigation, the detectives were riding the elevator when it came to an abrupt stop between the 5th and 6th floors. Then the lights went out. Now at first they weren't too worried. The elevator was known to be pretty janky at times, but when they started hearing an ominous clicking noise coming from above their heads, they froze. What was this? Was it the predator? They removed one of the roof panels and shone their flashlights, only to see a foot-long black shape moving towards them. Suddenly, it was on top of one of the detectives. His partner fired at it. When backup arrived, they found the detective cowering in a corner, a mutated spider across from him. When police explored the rest of the elevator shaft, they found the thing had laid eggs, which they burnt to a crisp with flamethrowers. Many people believe these monstrous spiders were born out of the Chernobyl disaster caused by radiation exposure that altered their genes. Were aliens involved in the Chernobyl disaster? Well, there's a conspiracy that says they very well may have been, but not in the way you're probably thinking. Instead of being blamed for the meltdown itself, extraterrestrial beings are rumored to have actually helped prevent an even worse catastrophe. The theory goes that when the disaster happened, aliens may have intervened to help contain the situation. Now, what is this actually based on? Well, nothing. One eyewitness, Mikhail Varitsky, reported seeing a strange fiery ball of light hovering above the reactor during the night of the accident. He described it as a glowing orb that hung in the air for a few minutes. In his exact words, "I and other people from my team went to the site of the blast at night. We saw a ball of fire and it was slowly flying in the sky. I think the ball was 6 or 8 meters in diameter. Then we saw 2 rays of crimson light stretching towards the 4th unit. The object was some 300 meters from the reactor. The event lasted for about 3 minutes. The lights of the object went out and it flew away in the northwestern direction." End quote. Some people think this may have been an alien craft, and this wasn't the only sighting either. There had apparently been a number of UFO sightings in the sky in the days leading up to the accident, so were extraterrestrials helping to manage the radiation and prevent it from spreading uncontrollably? Did the Bible predict the Chernobyl disaster? Well, some interpret a passage from the book of Revelation to be pretty eerily accurate to the events. There's a passage that talks about a great star falling from the sky and poisoning the water, and that star is called wormwood. Well, in Russian, Chernobyl translates to wormwood, which has led many to think the Bible was somehow foreshadowing the disaster. The exact passage goes as follows: "And the 3rd angel sounded the trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, burning as it were a torch, and it fell on the 3rd part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the 3rd part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter." Now, aside from the wormwood thing, there are other similarities here. Firefighters at Chernobyl described the fires at Reactor 4 as burning like a torch, just like in the scripture, and the part about bitter waters could definitely be interpreted as the radiation seeping into local water, making it unsafe to drink. There's even a sculpture near Chernobyl showing an angel with a trumpet, created by a Ukrainian artist as a tribute to the firefighters and workers who risked their lives during the crisis. Up next, we have the tale of the Scream. So in 1997, a nuclear physicist named Andrei Korsakov from the University of Buffalo had an eerie experience at the Chernobyl power plant. While visiting the site of Reactor 4, he reported hearing a faint but frantic voice screaming for help as he was taking radiation readings in the infamous Ground Zero area at around 7:30 in the morning. Now, after hearing the screams, Korsakov rushed back upstairs to tell the personnel what he heard, but to his shock, they told him that he was the first person to enter that restricted area in 3 years. The security protocols were strict, too. Entry required a password, handprint scan, and any unauthorized presence would trigger a whole whackload of alarms. So, who had been screaming? In 1996, a researcher named Vitaly Pravitsev looked into the possibility of the accident having been caused by an earthquake. People were pretty skeptical though. Experts pointed out over 80 discrepancies in his report, but then in 1997, a group of scientists from the United Institute of the Physics of the Earth took another look into this. They found that on the night of April 25th to the 26th, just 16 seconds before the reactor exploded, 3 nearby geological stations recorded a weak seismic event. So did an earthquake cause this disaster? And if so, was it natural, or was there a possibility that it was intentional? Sounds crazy, but the idea of weaponized earthquakes isn't entirely out of the realm of possibility. During the Cold War, there were rumors that both the Soviet Union and the US were researching tectonic weapons. We don't know for sure if these weapons were actually ever developed or used, but some think they may have been, of course, in secret. I mean, even Nikola Tesla claimed to have created a device in 1898 that could produce earthquake-like effects. An article in Pravda, the former Soviet newspaper, claimed in 1992 that geophysical weapons were indeed developed, but the government denied this. Another conspiracy has to do with the KGB. The idea is that they wanted to sabotage Reactor 4 to scare other countries away from building their own nuclear power plants. The goal? To monopolize Europe's energy market entirely. The thinking goes like this: if Chernobyl created massive fear about nuclear energy, countries in Western and Central Europe would maybe think twice before investing in their own nuclear facilities. With limited energy sources in Europe, the KGB figured that if they could make these countries dependent on Soviet oil and gas, they'd be in a position of power. Of course, if you're going to look at the KGB having something to do with the incident, it's only natural for others to speculate about the US government as well. Ever since the disaster took place in 1986, there were suspicions that the CIA might have had something to do with it, which is not surprising in the slightest. This one's pretty obvious. The idea is that the CIA orchestrated the explosion at Reactor 4 to create fear around nuclear energy and destabilize the USSR's influence. It was a tense period of time for the Soviets and the United States, and by creating a catastrophic event like this, the CIA could not only undermine the Soviet government's credibility, but also discourage other nations from developing nuclear power themselves, giving them the edge in the global energy market. Some were also highly skeptical of the rapid response of the US, thinking that they could have had a prior knowledge of the disaster. Now into more paranormal stuff. Like with any ghost town, especially one abandoned for such a tragic reason, ghost stories are plentiful. The amusement park has to be one of the eeriest spots in Pripyat. It was built just days before the disaster. It was meant to be a place of fun for families, but that never came to be. Sadly, it was never officially opened to the public, but legend has it that if you happen to be exploring Pripyat late at night, you may hear the faint sounds of laughter and music coming from the park. Visitors have reported strange occurrences while exploring. Some people say that when they approach the bumper cars, they can faintly hear the sounds of engines starting. Another creepy part about the park, and really the whole town itself, are the dolls scattered throughout it. Dolls that were left behind, now left to decay. Some believe that these dolls, especially those found in the carousel area, have taken on a life of their own. People have claimed that the dolls seem to change positions or appear in places they weren't before, but the giant rusted Ferris wheel is the most recognizable sight in the park. Some have said that when the wind blows, the wheel creaks and groans, sounding almost like whispers. It's not just the amusement park that's said to be haunted though. Urban explorers have reported seeing dark figures darting between buildings all throughout the city of Pripyat, especially in the empty schools and hospitals. Could these shadowy figures be the spirits of those who died in the disaster, still trapped in the abandoned city they once lived and worked in? forever doomed to roam the desolate streets. Some will say they've seen unexplained silhouettes peering out at them from corners of rooms or appearing just out of the corner of their eye. But are there actually shadowy entities trapped in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, or could people just be seeing things, either from psyching themselves out or having actual illusions brought on by the radioactivity? Now, the Black Bird of Chernobyl is probably the eeriest urban legend surrounding the Chernobyl disaster. The Black Bird of Chernobyl is a creepy urban legend that's come about in the years since the nuclear disaster in '86, but residents claimed to have seen the creature in the days leading up to it. It's often described as a big, dark figure, an enormous black owl or raven looking thing. People claim to have spotted it flying around the Chernobyl power plant in the days leading up to the explosion. Not only that, but residents began having these horrific, vivid nightmares about it after spotting it. So what was this thing and why was it there? Well, the main theory is that the creature was an entity acting as a bad omen, a warning of the disaster to come, very similar to Mothman showing up in the Silver Bridge right before it collapsed. Some even think the Black Bird of Chernobyl and Mothman are the exact same creature. So what do you all think? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and with all that said, I've been your host James. I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.